definitely what we do need is continued government support, because what we've seen along there is that even the most efficient systems, that in the last 2 years no one could have envisaged the challenge that would have been there with regards input costs. If we were talking, say, 2 years on from, say, sheep prices reaching record levels, and we didn't have those fertiliser prices, we didn't have those concentrate prices, well, we'd be looking at a very different sector, and I think very different levels of optimism and confidence.
Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you the latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. We're joined in this week's episode by Darren Carty, Sheep and Schemes Editor with the Farmers Journal, to take a look back at the trends in national ewe flock over the past decade and implications that this will have for the sheep industry. Darren discusses the change in ewe numbers, the region shift that has occurred and the impact that this has had on the sector. We discuss breeding sales this year, opportunities and resilience in the sector, and we finish up the conversation with Darren highlighting some of the technical areas that will come more into focus in the coming seasons. We hear first from Darren who puts the national ewe flock in context for us.
Yeah, so if we look at numbers have been, I suppose, relatively steady in recent years, Kieran. We're standing at about 2.66 million ewes. That'd be up a couple of 100,000 on a decade ago. But if we look at the last couple of years, say in isolation, there hasn't been too much of a change overall. But there has been, I suppose, what that figure masks or what it hides is that there's been a big change where our ewe numbers are, where our sheep numbers are across the country. And that is something that trend over the last decade is continuing and probably will continue, I suppose, maybe in its current vein, given that there's a lot of pressures on nitrates looming, that there's also, I suppose, maybe continued conversions, and there's more pressure on land use or land utilisation.
That's something we will definitely drill into a little bit more. Like in overall context, I suppose it's kind of hard just maybe to think back on it, but relative to, we say, 10 years ago, 2012 figures, we have seen that slight increase in ewe numbers.
Yeah, we've seen a slight increase. I suppose it's more than a slight. Say we've seen your numbers are probably standing 200,000 head higher. That if we think back, say, to 2008, 2009, 2010, your numbers are under real pressure. We've seen the introduction of the sheep grassland scheme, which provided a small reprieve. But the biggest thing that gave an injection into your numbers was an increase in price, or a substantial increase in price from 2010 through to 2011 into 12. And that held static for a number of years. There wasn't a huge amount of fluctuation in it. Average prices through those years was somewhere in the region of $4.50 a kilo to $4.80 a kilo for lambs. It's only in the last 2 years, or let's say 3 years, that we've seen another jump on that. But that, say, increase in 2011 brought a significant, I suppose, maybe boost of confidence into the sheep sector. And it was occurring at a time where there was probably a lot of pressure on suckler numbers in some counties. And over the subsequent years, we've seen a lot of trends on that. If we take, I suppose, maybe the standout trends, and we start at where sheep numbers are big first, that if we take Donegal, it's the largest sheep county in Ireland at the moment. There's about 370,000 ewes going on the 2022 sheep census. But if we're to look at, say, how that has changed over the last decade, there's just shy of 58,000 more ewes in the sector. They have replaced over 7,000 suckler cows. And at the same time, there's been an increase of over 5,000, say, dairy cows in the sector. So Donegal is a county that has, I suppose, maybe drove on with regards to your numbers. But it hasn't been the largest, say, change. Mayo has actually been the county that has recorded the largest numerical change, in the ewe number stand at 327,000 now, and over the last decade they would have increased by about 62,200. Part of the increases in those counties as well, it's something that we often forget about, is that there was a renewed impetus in recent years on say having sheep grazing the hills. There was commonage framework plans done, and we did see a lot of, I suppose, maybe movement of sheep back up to the hill. So the fact that Donegal and, say, Mayo both have a large land area of sort of mountain and hill ground definitely helped in that situation as well. Also, suckler cows moving off marginal areas and being replaced by sheep brought in changes as well. We didn't see the same increase in Galway that we probably would have thought we would have seen in Galway. sheep numbers only increased, or ewe numbers, by about 16,000 head to now sit around 280,000 head. So while Galway was once very close to Donegal, there now is a significant shift. And if we look at your numbers in Donegal, Galway, Kerry and Mayo, you're looking at over 45 to 46% of the national flock. So we've seen numbers, I suppose, become a lot more concentrated to the west, at the expense of sheep numbers in the east of the country. And like I talk about very big counties there, like Galway, Donegal, Galway, we've also seen increases in smaller counties as well.
It's interesting. So there's a couple of things going on over that last couple of years. Let's just take the dry stock farmers first. We have seen that shift maybe from sucklers. Sheep numbers probably remain in places. Look, probably a little bit opposite to what most would assume, that the sheep would go first. It actually was the sucklers that reduced on a lot of dry stock farms first. But sheep are more resilient in a lot of places.
It probably was, Kieran. And like if we're to look at, I suppose, anecdotal reports, or to look at even reports from your colleagues, like they would have said that there was, I suppose, a renewed emphasis on a mixed farming system as well. That some farms that would have gone away from sheep altogether now had a cohort, or now had a small flock of sheep coming back into the situation again. And to me, weather had a big influence in that as well. That we had a few years with very wet summers, high costs on the suckler side, and sheep were utilised on those farms again. And I think that was a big help. There was also a nice injection of youth in some of those counties as well. That's long overdue again. But if we think back to maybe 8 or 10 years ago, that whole increase in prices did bring a bit more, I suppose, maybe optimism, and more younger farmers joining the sector, and all of those things helped as well. Like if you took a county like Sligo and Leitrim, and if we looked at, say, numbers in Leitrim, they're up 20,000 over the last say 10 years, and that's almost, say, 27% coming from a small flock basis. Similar, if we look at numbers in Sligo, they're up 20,000 or 24%. So they are big increases. Longford, small flock, but numbers up, say, 23-24%. So all those counties, say, that might have a more, I suppose, maybe a significant percentage of more marginal land, they all recorded nice increases, which was, I suppose, the driver of those numbers increasing. Because on the flip side of that we can very quickly count up a situation of your numbers probably falling by 70 or 80,000 in counties in the east of the country.
That's the other key element, like there, and some of this will have played out on the western seaboard as well. But if we went to the east of the country, Darren, that increase in dairy cow numbers, like if we looked at counties like Wexford, places like Westmeath, have seen huge expansion. Probably on both fronts, the cow numbers certainly, suckler cow numbers certainly fell, but the sheep numbers also follow that trend.
Definitely, like the two standout counties, and we hear this an awful lot, is Wexford is one of the big standout counties, and we would have seen this if we go back maybe 12, 18 months ago. There was a lot of high profile, say, farmers that exited sheep production to go into dairying, and that was very big, I suppose, maybe in recent years. Sheep numbers in Wexford over the last decade have fallen by just shy of 16,500 ewes, or 17%. The reduction is actually probably even to a greater extent if we were to look at maybe the combination of say counties around Kilkenny, Laois, Carlow, where there has been a nice bit of expansion of dairying as well. But definitely Wexford stands out on its own with that, say, five-digit reduction. If we're to look, I suppose, the other standout counties, Kilkenny, 10,000 of reduction. That's 20% when you take the Kilkenny had a flock of 50,000 ewes in 2012. It's now down to 40,000 ewes. Carlow, 10% drop, 8,000 head down to about 70,000 ewes. Cork, actually, I thought it'd be more. Cork fell by 5,000 ewes. So it's remarkable, given that over the last decade there's been 100,000 extra dairy cows entering Cork, while yet there's been only 5,000 sheep exiting production. If we're to look at Kilkenny in the same time frame, that 10,000 sheep that went out of the county, there was 43,000 extra dairy cows. And likewise, if you're to look at Wexford, there was an extra 35,000 dairy cows entering the sector. And those counties also, I suppose, maybe The increase in sucklers was very hard the increase in dairy cow numbers was very hard on suckler farming. And if we look at, say, Wexford, there was 27,000 cows there in 2022, 10,000 down on a decade ago. Kilkenny, 13, almost 14,000 cows less. You've only 27,000 suckler cows now. Kilkenny, Laois had a drop of 20%. Carlow had a drop of 23%. Cork had a big drop of 25%. So significant numbers, I suppose, and significant change to the farming landscape in all of those areas down there. And like one would have to say, Kieran, that you're probably going to see a continuation of that. That if there is a further move, say, from the nitrates derogation in the coming years, and we see that there is pressure from 220 down to 170, for example, one could only envisage that you'd have a significant knock-on impact in Tipperary, Kilkenny, Waterford, Cork, all those areas where I suppose there's a high concentration in certain areas of dairy cows now.
Yeah, look, certainly that challenge in that rental market, it's going to have an impact on the company. It's probably having an impact already, but as you indicated, they are likely to have a bigger impact in the coming seasons. Like, if we talk that in context, we've seen a big regional shift in production in a very short space of time. That's going to have a knock-on impact on factory supply, market supply as well, and that local economy. Just in that, for the sheep production end of it, it will have an impact.
Massive. And like if we look at where the largest sheep factory is, Irish Country Meats in Camolan, it is probably seeing the greatest exodus of sheep around it. And it's no surprise then that you see maybe agents for ICM down that neck of the woods, very active in Donegal, linked into a lot of the big producer groups, very active back my side of the country now, and there's significant numbers of lambs leaving on a twice or even 3 times a week through agents, through collection points, which if we went back 3 or 4 years ago, those collection points wouldn't have been a feature at all. There's sheep coming out of Headford, coming into East Galway, Roscommon, South Roscommon, and even the same way for collection points in Roscommon for lambs leaving and going to either Kildare Chilling or going to down to Irish Country Meats as well. So we're seeing, I suppose, a significant shift that way, and we're seeing, I suppose, maybe more, I suppose, maybe appetite to tie into, say, sheep numbers in those areas. And also, I think one of the big shifts as well is that if we look at, say, the change in trends of, say, the production cycle now, if you take, say, all the sheep numbers that have gone out of Wexford, Kilkenny, Carlow, a lot of those were early lamb production systems. And there's a real, I suppose, maybe appetite now for factories to tie into, particularly down in Irish Country Meats, to tie into producer groups like up in Donegal or Mayo or Galway, where there might be a significant carryover of, say, hoggets from later lambing flocks, and that is, I suppose, maybe something that they're trying to use to insulate themselves from having a lower supplies in the first half of the year. And I think that's probably something that's going to become more apparent in the next few years, particularly with a lot of religious festivals now falling in the first 6 months of the year.
So not only are we seeing that shift in production more to the western counties, more to the peripheral counties, you're moving out of the Barrowland there and you're moving to more marginal areas, you're moving to later lambing flocks, which naturally suits the area. That's having an impact on the overall production system we're seeing.
Definitely. And like you would say this, in an ideal world, you would think that a lot of those lambs would move back down, or a lot of the lambs, say, from the hill regions in Mayo, Donegal, Galway, that the sensible thing, or that I suppose the more economical or feasible thing is that they would move back down to the east of the country and maybe be finished on some of the tillage farms and catch crops. We won't go into the whole debacle that was this year, Kieran, but like the initial rules brought in by the department this year caused real harm for some of those supply chains, and I think that will have an impact right out well into late spring this year, because you're going to see, I think, a lot of late lambs, a lot of light lambs still on the market that possibly could have been, say, transferred to farms in the east. But going back to your initial question, definitely not only are the sheep numbers moving, but also, say, the production potential. And if you do take lambs out of I suppose maybe your more highly productive areas or your better land areas, it definitely will change I suppose, the pattern of supply in future years, because lamb numbers just won't finish as quick in the West without use of concentrates.
Look, we'll talk about trends. We've seen quite a big change in a positive way with increased numbers, but in the last couple of years, we've seen a regional shift. Potentially, Darren, if we look at some of the more marginal areas, like if the organic scheme was introduced, some of the more eco schemes coming in, will that have an impact on ewe numbers? Will we see a greater uptake in those counties? We're probably seeing a bit of it already.
Yeah, I think undoubtedly you will, Kieran, that if we were to look at, say, some of the initial figures, say from the organic farming scheme, there's about 80,000 sheep that are now, say, in conversion, side that are converted to organics. There's another 150,000 in conversion across about 1,500 odd flocks. So quite a significant number or percentage of the 4,000 farmers that are farming organically. 40% of those will be categorised as, say, their main enterprises will be sheep. And I think that the organic farming scheme is opening again on Friday the 3rd of November. I think that given the challenging year that you've had, given the last 2 years have been very challenging in terms of hill lamb prices, that we're going to see a significant cohort of hill lamb or maybe up lamb, say, sheep producers now look more seriously at organics. And I think that on some of those farms that you're going to have an inevitable situation that, yes, you're going to have more land farmed organically, but you're not probably going to have a significant increase in output from those farms. Like, if you take it at the moment, the leakage from organic farming system is probably somewhere around 60 to 70%. Now, that leakage is going to probably continue, mightn't be at the same rate, but I think where your reduction is, or where your, say, the drop off in production relative to an increase in organic participation is going to come from, is that some farmers in those areas are just going to cut their cloth to suit. And whether that be lamb less your numbers or cut your numbers, I think you're going to see a scenario like that. And look, we're already hearing, I suppose, maybe some reports in some areas of, say, maybe some farms have gone organic and maybe not putting out a ram this year, or they don't even have to be organic farms, or some hill farms have said that given the poor returns, that they're cutting down on your numbers. Now, you'll always hear a lot of those reports, I suppose, when confidence is on the ground, when optimism is at a lower level. So exactly how much of that translates into an actual scenario of that happening, it's hard to know. But definitely, if we have more organic, say, sheep farmers, it definitely will bring a reduction in the number of, say, sheep that is held on those farms. Because one of the things we often forget with organics, but to be a successful organic farmer in terms of driving production, maintaining the same level of, say, stock that you have if you're a highly stocked farm, it actually probably takes a greater level of management with regards bringing in, say, alternative crops, or bringing in, say, forage crops to finish animals. And like we've seen that a lot of the farms that are probably joining organics, that a significant cohort of those, they don't really, I suppose, maybe have that plan in mind. It's more so joining for the premium rather for joining for the organic principles.
The point I was going to bring in later on, but it's probably apt now. If we're to take that problem in organics, it's probably a wider problem in the sheep sector. And there's a great opportunity maybe in this one too. You touched on this already. Store lamb production, store lamb finishing. For some producers, maybe on better land in the east of the country, in that organic setting, the need for a bit more joined up thinking at an industry level, but also it's a potential system to incorporate in a lot of farms, Darren. It's one that doesn't require huge amounts of labour input. There's great feasibility for farms to look at store lamb finishing, particularly ones maybe have cut back in young numbers over the last couple of years. Is it a little bit of an untapped resource? And at an industry level, do we need to shift a little bit, or thinking a little bit more towards linking up farmers?
I think it's definitely an untapped resource, and I think you're probably going to see a small bit of a move towards that direction. In one sense, because we have seen, I suppose, maybe the potential of that sort of dry hogget system plateau, that if we look back at the last 5 to 8 years in particular, there's been a significant number of farmers operating the system where they're buying ewe lambs, say, whether that be that they've cut down, say, the ewe flock, or else gone out of lamb and ewes altogether, buying ewe lambs and producing them as, say, as ewe hoggets for sale in the following autumn. That's, I suppose, maybe production system has been, you'd say, probably flooded a bit in recent years. This year is the first year where you'd say numbers have been tighter, and that has actually helped the system. It has actually helped the prices that have been paid, and we're getting back to a scenario, I think, where the say numbers of animals coming into the system is probably closer to the demand. But if we're to look at, say, the options for some of those farmers, I think that the better option for some of those might be purchasing, yes, continue to purchase in a cohort, because a lot of those systems have to, say, adhere to A&C rules or have to have minimum stocking rates for BIS or for whatever schemes they have. But I think that a better option for some of those would be to, say, finish a cohort of the poor, say, Euro hoggets, or else operate, say, a small store lamb system beside it. You mentioned whether that would be a feasible option for organic farming. The only issue at the moment is that we're seeing that there isn't a significant number of organic, say, farmers joining organics across, say, the tillage sector, where you would have a ready supply of catch crops. So the department, I suppose, are prioritising or have higher payments for tillage, dairy and horticulture. The uptake has been so low in the last, say, last two tranches in particular. So I think you're probably going to see that sort of low uptake continue in tillage. So that's probably a little bit tempered on the say, the capacity or the potential that's there. But definitely, I think there is more opportunities. And we've seen this in some areas. We've seen the likes of some, say, the Marts and Kerry sending up 5-figure sums of lambs up to farmers in Carlow and Meath along that direction. Maybe not this year or last year, but previous to that, there was a very good, I suppose, maybe trade establishing, and that's where we need to get to, is moving lambs maybe more out of those areas into areas where lambs can be finished at a lower cost, and you're less, I suppose, maybe reliant on concentrates. The biggest issue in the last couple of years, and we touched on it, is this year is the catch crops, and then last year and this year has been weather, drought last year, and very, very challenging conditions with regards to flooding this year and high rainfall levels in counties that wouldn't have normally experienced it. So you're seeing the combination of that, I suppose, maybe tempering demand for store lambs in those areas. But it's something I think that the sector probably needs to build a bit more to. And I think the sector needs to definitely, I think the Department of Agriculture need to look at how they can foster more relationships between sheep farmers and tillage farmers, rather than put a wedge between them like we've seen happen this year.
We also have to keep it in context, like, where they have the scope and the scale. There is a great margin there in them. There is a great potential for a margin in that store lamb system. Like, so it's a viable option to add on to a unit.
Well, if we're to look at, maybe, I'd say, and I haven't done any figures on this, but I'd say if we're to look at 5 of the last 8 years, that farmers that have bought light, say, hill store lambs and kept them out, say, and had them drafted ready for slaughter in late spring to coincide with peak demand and higher prices, they probably returned as much as farmers that have lambing down yours and maybe taken the brunt of labour. So definitely, if there is a system there that suits, those store lamb finishing systems can be very lucrative, provided you tap into the system that, I suppose, maybe suits the farm best and suits the best opportunity to have lambs there available to the highest price point.
Look, we started talking about yos. We'll conclude talking about yos. Anecdotally, Darren, this year, nobody will put their hand up and say it wasn't challenging. It continues to be very challenging even at the moment. There's a gist of a chat out there that new numbers have reduced. It's not really bearing out, though, in the numbers that we're looking at the moment.
No, and like, you hit the nail on the head, Kieran. It has been a very, very challenging year. But if you were to look at or take a benchmark of, say, hogget sales this year, it would have exceeded all my expectations anyway, and it probably would have exceeded expectations of a lot of the sector. That if we took the first half of this year in isolation and we took maybe a bit of pressure on price and then came into a very high cost, say, scenario where fertilizer costs are very high, the concentrate costs very high, a lot of doom and gloom in the sector, a lot of people talking about reducing numbers, that didn't sort of bear out in that everyone was expecting that autumn breeding sales would be under significant pressure and that there would be the prices would be well below last year. one of the things I mentioned earlier was that I think definitely the lower numbers helped. But we've seen that there was quite a bit of confidence in those sales. And I think that you're probably gone to a situation that you have a cohort of farmers now that are in sheep farming, they know sheep farming, they're set up for sheep production, and that they are maybe confident in that sector and that they might have tried other sectors, or we've seen other, say, some farmers try a dairy calf to beef system and maybe find that it didn't suit their land type or that type of thing. So I think that going forward, we probably will see numbers steady, particularly in the say in the western half or the Midlands. Yes, we're going to see continued pressure down in the east of the country, but if we're to look at your numbers, the figures probably don't show up in regards to kill figures so far this year. Now, one of the things that could be hidden a bit in the kill figures is that if we're look at the overall, say, your throughput or you throughput this year, we're running at about 270,000 head. We're about 40,000 head lower than this time last year. Now, I think a significant cohort of those ewes might actually have been drafted for slaughter, but we've seen that demand for, say, very heavy ewes this year and the rise of, I suppose, maybe local abattoirs or, say, units that are policed by the local authority or county councils rather than the Department of Agriculture. So it's probably that 42,000 figure that's running lower is probably reduced a bit, and we're probably going to see a higher, say, number of live exports of ewes. But taking all of that into account, you would have expected that the figures would have been a lot higher for ewe numbers. Now, we have seen, I think in the last week or in the last 2 weeks, we're seeing a significant number of ewes coming out that are in poor condition. So maybe farmers kept their cull ewes on for a bit longer this year, say since weaning, definitely in the start of the year when we had record cull ewe prices. Cull ewes were say drafted rapidly. So I suppose the anecdotal reports of what we're hearing of significant numbers leaving the sector isn't tallying true to what we're seeing with the figures coming through from the kill data or from live exports or even from the experience of sales this year. And I think that, yes, there could be a lot of doom and gloom around, say, your numbers reducing in the east of the country, but I think that if there's one bright point you can take, I think that is definitely, I suppose, maybe in the context of where we are with input costs, record input costs, in the context of where we are with, I suppose, hill sheep systems being under real pressure, the fact that we haven't seen more ewes being slaughtered, to me, is a positive thing.
So, Darren, if we'll maybe put that in context, the sector is a little bit more resilient than maybe some of us would have thought. But like at a basic level, where we'd all advocate maybe cutting back on our problem ewes, culling a little bit harder in a given season, particularly this year that's been difficult, reducing overall ewe numbers, reduce the overall lamb sales next year in a flock. So your labour input is more or less the same. Unless you're very heavily stocked, it's going to have a negative impact on your margin in the following season.
Yeah. And I think it's always a good exercise, Kieran, to, as you say, to look at, say, your flock, look at what's performing, cull out, say, the bottom performers in the flock. And also, you'd have to say, in the context of the last 2 years, that we need to get back to, I suppose, maybe looking at production of a grass-based system. We can be less reliant on concentrate to, I suppose, plug any gaps or compensate maybe for grass management not being where it should be or maybe where it's like. Definitely the resilience part of it. You see more farmers now more interested in, say, alternative forages. We've seen the rise of farmers experimenting with clover, with herb mixes, and that's something that has to be commended. And it is a show, I suppose, maybe of the resilience of the sector there and the drive to keep moving forward and to keep improving. Like the one thing that we probably have as well, say that does need a bit of reversing is the age profile of the sheep sector. But you'd have to say that, say, the more, I suppose, farmers with the larger flocks, the farmers that are, say, pushing on, that those farmers are operating at a very high standard and a very good level of efficiency. And that's something that is welcome to see as well. And this, as you mentioned earlier on, look at the alternatives out there, moving away from sheep to dairy calf to beef systems or sucklers, is probably encouraging some farmers to stick with sheep. The only standout alternative, as we've seen in recent years, has been dairying. And I think that maybe the downturn in prices and the pressure from, say, nitrates and maybe more wider environmental concerns has probably tempered the scale of conversions or the rate of conversions at the moment.
Darren, you covered a hell of a lot. Really appreciate you coming on with me and going through that. And we put a lot of effort into pulling some of the numbers together and looking at the trends. We'll not wait 5 years to have you on again, but I think it was an interesting synopsis of where the industry has been in the last couple of years, some of the challenges and some of the opportunities to stay. And I think where you finished at the end point, like the efficiency in systems, the labour input in systems, that's something that's going to become more important over the coming seasons. And it's probably something like yourself, ourselves have to work on for a change in what will be a change in landscape.
Certainly, Kieran, like labour efficiency is going to, across every sector, it's going to become massive in the next few years. And I think that also how inputs or how resources are used is going to be a big one as well. And we haven't talked at all today around, say, the impact of land designations, nature restoration law. But I think, look, those are things that we could get caught up on. We could spend a half an hour talking about, and we really don't know what the impact of those are going to be. Yes, they have the impact to have, they have the potential to have a significant impact, but in a void of, I suppose, maybe any certainty of what's going to be delivered, I think this we have to keep planning as is, and as you say, for try and reduce, say, labour input, try and make the systems most efficient, and try and return the best margin that's there. And like definitely, what we do need is continued government support, because what we've seen along there is that even the most efficient systems that in the last 2 years, no one could have envisaged the challenge that would have been there with regards input costs. If we were talking, say, 2 years on from, say, sheep prices reaching record levels, and we didn't have those fertiliser prices, we didn't have those concentrate prices, well, we'll be looking at a very different sector, and I think very different levels of optimism and confidence.
Darren, look, really appreciate you coming on today. Thanks very much. We'll have to leave it there for this week's episode. It's very interesting looking back at what's happened in the sheep sector in the past decade, and implication that those changes have had, particularly the regional shift on sheep supply and overall impact on the sector itself, as well as some of the opportunities that are out there for producers. I'd like to thank Darren again for going through that in detail with us and pulling them numbers together. That's it for this week. For updates on our sheep programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us for more episodes.